She should have died in the snow. That's what history would have preferred, if it could bury another inconvenient truth under centuries of silence. A pregnant woman, abandoned by her husband, swallowed by a wilderness said to be untamed. But it wasn't the wilderness that was wild. It was the men, and it was never about survival. It was about what happens when institutions break you, and the universe answers with something older, something watching. They told you the frontier was built by brave men and good wives, that families forged westward in God's light and manifest destiny. But that's not the truth, not even close. The real frontier devoured people like Sarah Mitchell, quietly, brutally, and without apology. She was 7 months pregnant when her husband disappeared with another woman, left at a trading post with no money, no supplies, and no voice. The wagon train moved on without her, and with it her last thread of safety unraveled. A white woman, alone, bleeding trust and hope by the mile, walking east through the Ohio Territory, chasing a lie carved into bark. You ever walk 40 miles through snow while your unborn child kicks in your gut and the trees whisper that no one is coming? Sarah did. But here's the thing they don't write in history books. Survival is rarely noble. It's desperation. It's rage. It's bargaining with ancient forces when civilization turns its back. And that's when she saw it. Smoke rising through the trees. Not salvation, not yet, but a threshold. And when she crossed it, when her half-dead body stumbled into the path of a solitary hunter who should have killed her or turned her away, history changed. Not the kind they teach in schools, the kind passed down in whispers, through scars and old bloodlines, the kind that doesn't just rewrite your life, it rewrites you. What happened in that cabin wasn't rescue, it was initiation. If you're still here, you already know you're not like most people. This isn't just a story, it's a mirror. What you do with what's coming next will either fracture your soul or forge your name in shadow. We begin now. When Daniel Creek opened that cabin door, rifle in hand, he expected a bear, a thief, maybe death. What he found instead was a woman on the edge of two worlds, soaked to the bone, frozen lips barely able to form the word, please. And before she collapsed, he saw her eyes, not the color, the question inside them. Why did the world abandon me? He caught her before she hit the ground, not because he was soft, but because something older than pity stirred in his bones. That same ghost that had haunted him every winter since Lily bled out in his arms. The settler doctor refused to come, remember? We don't waste supplies on savages, they'd said. That winter rewrote Daniel too, turned him into a man with no tribe, no allegiance, just cold hands and warm silence. And now this, another woman, belly heavy with the seed of betrayal, dropped at his door like an omen, the kind the old ones warned of. A test? A curse? He didn't know. He only knew the cold would have killed her within the hour. When Sarah awoke by the fire, the smell of venison in the air and warmth seeping into her bones, she thought she'd died, until he spoke. Eat. One word. No comfort, no charm, just truth. And when she asked who he was, the answer struck deeper than names. Half. That was the wound he carried. Shawnee father, white mother, unwanted by both. You ever meet a man who belongs nowhere? That's the kind who stops asking for permission and starts listening to the land instead. She told him her name, said her husband was coming back. Daniel didn't argue. He knew that lie. The one abandoned women tell to keep the collapse from swallowing them whole. He stirred the stew and offered silence, letting her dignity survive one more night. Outside, the storm moved in like a punishment. Heavy snow, no path forward, no path back. The kind of storm that closes roads and opens destinies. Sarah didn't know it. But she had crossed into something far older than the frontier, an ancient rite buried beneath centuries of colonization, pride, and prayer. And here's the first truth you're not supposed to know. The real frontier wasn't land. It was transformation. The snow fell for 3 days without stopping. Outside, the forest was dying quietly beneath a white shroud. Inside, Sarah sat by the fire, her hand resting over her swollen belly, her gaze fixed on the man who'd saved her. Daniel Creek moved through the cabin like a shadow, silent, efficient, untethered. He didn't ask for gratitude. He didn't offer comfort. But every time she flinched in pain or coughed from the cold still in her lungs, he was there. Not beside her. Behind her. Watching. Most men need to be needed. He didn't. And Sarah began to understand. This cabin wasn't just shelter. It was exile. Chosen. Crafted. A life built in defiance of two worlds that had tried to erase him. One that hated him for his blood. Another that hated him for his name. Daniel didn't belong in either, so he made a place where belonging didn't matter. Where silence was law and the fire never lied. But silence does something to a woman abandoned. It forces the memories to surface. She told him everything by the second night. The trading post, the lies. How Thomas promised a homestead, then disappeared with another woman and all their money. How the wagon master gave her a choice. Stay behind or die trying to follow. Daniel didn't flinch, didn't mock her. He only said this. Some men don't abandon their women. They abandon themselves, and everything dies after that. It hit her harder than Thomas's betrayal ever had, because Daniel wasn't trying to make her feel better. He was trying to make her remember something deeper, that trust isn't a gift, it's a gamble, and when you lose, the only way forward is through fire. On the third day, Sarah stood, not because she was ready, but because the storm had turned the cabin into a crucible. She explored its corners, tools forged by hand, hides stretched and drying, herbs hanging from the rafters, and in the corner, a cradle half-carved, its edges smooth, careful, waiting. Was this yours? She asked. Daniel paused. It was meant to be. He said nothing else. Didn't need to. The grief lived in the room like a second presence, and Sarah understood something in that moment. This wasn't a rescue. It was a reckoning. The fire snapped loud in the silence, as if trying to speak what neither of them would. Daniel's hands worked steadily, sharpening a blade, mending a snare, but his mind was somewhere else. You could feel it in the air, like a storm behind your ribs. Sarah, meanwhile, tried to make herself useful, tried to reclaim some semblance of control, folding the blankets, sweeping the floor with an old pine branch. It was absurd, really, domestic rituals in the heart of exile, but when your life collapses, you grasp for any shape at all. That night, the wind changed. Sarah woke from a fevered sleep to the sound of wood groaning, not the cabin, the forest, trees shifting like they were alive, watching, judging. Daniel stood at the window, rifle in hand, not afraid, listening. "What is it?" she whispered, clutching her belly. "Something old," he said without turning. "Something that doesn't like strangers in its woods." And Sarah saw it, just for a moment, a flicker of doubt in his face. The man who had faced down death, hunger, and blizzards without blinking was uneasy. That was the night she stopped pretending she was just a guest here. She had entered a domain where the rules were not written by men in powdered wigs or inked on parchment. The laws here were older. Blood laws. Spirit laws. Daniel didn't explain what he meant by something old. He didn't have to. You ever feel like the land itself is watching you? Like the trees remember who you are? That night, she felt it too. The baby kicked, hard, as if sensing it all. "You should sleep," Daniel said finally. "Tomorrow, I show you where you really are." The next morning, he led her outside. The snow was deep, but Daniel moved through it like a wolf, sure, silent, cutting trails no map had ever charted. Sarah followed, each step a defiance of weakness. A mile in, he stopped. There, hidden behind brush and birch, lay a circle of stones, blackened, weather-worn, ancient. "This is where they brought the women," Daniel said, "not the settlers, the ones who knew the old ways. When the forest chose a woman to survive, she came here." Sarah stepped closer. Her breath froze mid-air. The stones weren't arranged randomly. They formed a symbol, one she couldn't name, but somehow remembered. Daniel watched her. "You still think being left behind was an accident?" Sarah stared at the ring of ancient stones, her breath shallow, heart pounding like it remembered something her mind couldn't. This was no fire pit, no settler's camp. This was ceremony, a place where something had been called or sealed. She turned to Daniel. "What is this?" His voice was low, not reverent, but wary. "A birthing ground. Long before we came, before they burned the old names and baptized the rest. This land didn't belong to men. It belonged to something else. Women came here when the world failed them, when they were hunted, abandoned, or marked. The ones who bled, but didn't break." Sarah knelt beside the stones. The snow was melted in the center, as if the earth still breathed from within. "And what happened to them?" "They changed," he said simply, "and so did their children. No books mention these places. No maps show them. Because what happened here didn't serve empire. These grounds didn't make obedient wives or loyal citizens. They made women who remembered the power they were told to forget. They made bloodline warnings, and if you listen close, so close it hurts, you'll hear what they left behind, still echoing beneath the dirt." Sarah felt it. Not superstition, not fear, recognition. And maybe you felt it too, that flicker in your gut when you know something isn't natural, but it is true, the kind of truth men fear, because it doesn't need them. As Daniel guided her back toward the cabin, the wind picked up, howling low like a beast circling in the trees. He said nothing, neither did she, but in the quiet, Sarah made a decision. She was done waiting for rescue, done hoping Thomas would come galloping back to erase the damage. Hope is what kills you. That night, she couldn't sleep. The fire popped. Rebecca shifted inside her. Sarah stared at the ceiling and thought about the women who bled on that stone circle, alone, cold, betrayed, but not broken. She whispered into the dark, as if calling to them. "I'm not asking to be saved. I'm asking to remember. Now you, watching, if you've made it this far, you're already changing." Comment this phrase twice. No one is coming. I am becoming. Say it once for who you were. Say it again for who you will become. The storm came back that night, harder, colder, as if the forest had heard Sarah's vow and decided to test it. But she didn't cower. Not anymore. She sat upright in Daniel's cabin, wrapped in fur, holding the firelight in her eyes like a challenge. Every gust of wind that slammed against the walls felt like a question. Will you endure? Will you transform? Will you remember? And she did. Because something had shifted, not in the sky, not in the snow, inside her. A slow, cracking emergence of someone who'd always been buried beneath obedience, and Daniel saw it too. He didn't say it, but his gaze lingered longer. He moved differently around her now, not cautiously, respectfully. That's the thing about men who've lost everything. They can smell change before it speaks. "You speak less than most women," he told her that morning, while stirring a pot of herbs. "I used to speak more," she said, "before I learned no one was listening." Daniel looked up, Firelight casting jagged shadows across his face. "Then you were speaking to the wrong people." She nodded slowly, but inside she was screaming, not in pain, in recognition. Every memory of being silenced, by parents, by pastors, by Thomas, cracked like ice under fire. They hadn't feared her weakness. They'd feared her memory, her instinct, her voice. That evening she asked Daniel something most would not dare. "Why did your people abandon these places? The circles, the rites?" He didn't look at her, just stared into the fire like it owed him answers. "They didn't," he said finally. "They were made to forget. The priests came with Bibles, the traders came with coin, the soldiers came with fire, and the mothers were told to hush until the only thing that remembered was the land." Sarah reached out, fingers brushing the cradle Daniel had half finished for a son who never drew breath. "What happens to children born in exile?" she whispered. "They return," he said, "to finish what was started." That night, as the storm raged, Sarah began speaking to Rebecca inside her belly. Not soft lullabies, but ancient questions, demands, promises. Because this child would not be born into weakness. She would be born into fire. The first pain came just after midnight. Not the small, tight pangs she'd grown used to. This one cut deep, low and sharp, like something tearing through the very fabric of her being. Sarah gripped the edge of the table, a silent cry caught in her throat. Daniel was by her side instantly, not frantic, not shocked, ready. "It's too soon," she whispered, terror creeping into her voice. "She's not due yet." Daniel didn't flinch. Time obeys men, nature doesn't. He began moving with calm purpose. Heater on the fire, cloth laid out, knife sterilized. The same man who carved snares with stone blades now moved, like an elder midwife summoned by fate. Sarah wanted to panic, to scream for help, but from who? There was no town, no doctor, no husband galloping across the snow with redemption in his eyes. There was only the storm, the hunter, and her own raw power. Every contraction became a drumbeat in some ancient song her body had always known. Sweat poured down her back, her fingernails dug into fur, her teeth bit blood from her lip. But she didn't cry out. She bore it. She bore her. Daniel whispered no prayers. He offered no platitudes, just presence. Unwavering, masculine presence. The kind of strength that doesn't speak until it's asked. He held her hand, held her gaze. And when her strength faltered, he said the words that cleaved her soul open. "You are not alone in this pain. The forest is watching, and it remembers who you are." And in that moment, something rose up inside her, not rage, not fear, memory. Sarah wasn't a victim. She was a vessel, not abandoned, but chosen. Hours passed like centuries. Time broke, and as the first blue sliver of dawn cracked across the white horizon, the child came, not with a whimper, with a howl, a fierce, raw scream that sounded like protest and promise all at once. Sarah held her against her chest, skin to skin, pulse to pulse, and wept. She named her Rebecca, not for anyone, but for everyone who had been erased. Daniel looked on in silence, then smiled, not out of joy, but recognition. "She's loud," he said. Sarah nodded, tears on her cheeks. "She's not here to ask permission." In the days that followed Rebecca's birth, the world slowed into something sacred. Time didn't pass. It gathered. Around every movement, every breath, the snow still howled outside, burying roads, silencing the land, but inside the cabin, a different kind of silence had taken root, the kind that follows revelation. Sarah had expected exhaustion, fear, maybe regret. What she didn't expect was power. Not the kind you seize, the kind that seizes you. Rebecca was small but fierce. Her cries rang out like declarations. Her eyes, impossibly blue, scanned the room as if trying to remember a place she'd only just arrived in. Daniel carved in the corner quietly, fashioning a cradle from the one he'd started years ago. But Sarah knew he wasn't just carving wood. He was carving closure and something else. Hope. One morning, as snow filtered light through the frosted window, she asked him, "Where did you learn to care for babies like this?" He didn't answer right away, just wrapped Rebecca in softened deer hide, his hands firm but gentle. "My wife taught me," he said finally. "Lily, she died 3 winters ago, along with our son." Sarah's heart clenched. She'd suspected there was more beneath his silence, but now the shape of it became clear. He hadn't saved her because he was kind. He'd saved her because he remembered. He'd watched the woman he loved die in agony because a settler doctor wouldn't help a half-breed's wife. And now, he was redeeming what the world had destroyed. She didn't speak. Some griefs are too sacred for sympathy. He continued, his voice low. "I rode for help. They laughed in my face, said she wasn't worth the ride. When I came back, she was gone. Our son never took a breath." Sarah laid a hand over his. "Rebecca breathes for both of them now." Daniel nodded slowly, not in agreement, in acceptance. Because this wasn't just a second chance, it was a circle closing. The death of his bloodline had been witnessed by snow. Now its resurrection had been watched by fire. Sarah looked down at the child in her arms and knew this wasn't her daughter. This was her return, and she would never let the world erase her again. The blizzard broke on the 10th day. A soft light cracked open the sky, and the forest exhaled. Ice melted from the pines in slow drips, like the land was weeping in relief. But inside the cabin, time still stood still, anchored around the fragile miracle cradled in Sarah's arms. Rebecca had survived the storm, but something else had been born too. A silence between Sarah and Daniel, no longer made of discomfort, but of understanding. They had seen each other now, not as strangers, but as mirrors. One morning, Daniel returned from a short hunt with fresh rabbit and news. The trail was clearing. "You'll be able to leave in a few days," he said, almost without looking at her. Sarah didn't respond. She knew what he meant. He was offering her the world again, the one she'd come from, the one that had chewed her up and spat her into a blizzard. She could return to it, to wagons and whispers, to laws written by men who never bled or birthed, to a place where a woman was only as valuable as her husband's promises, or she could stay. That night, while Rebecca slept, Sarah stood by the window and asked the question she'd buried deep beneath the trauma. What would have happened if I never found this cabin? Daniel didn't hesitate. The forest would have taken you, but not in the way you think. She turned. What do you mean? There are things in these woods, he said, older than memory, older than God. They watch those who are lost. Some are taken. Some are changed. Sarah looked at him hard, her voice a whisper. Did I change? No, Daniel said. You remembered. That's what scares them. And that's when it clicked. She hadn't been abandoned by accident. She had been ejected, like a body rejecting a foreign object. Civilization had no place for women who wouldn't break, so it spat her out, and the wild took her in, not to comfort, but to awaken. Rebecca stirred, sighed. Ra picked her up and held her close, not gently, firmly, as if anchoring a soul to a body that was about to change the course of bloodlines. We don't belong to what left us, Sarah said. We belong to what we survive. And in the fire's reflection, she didn't see a mother. She saw a lineage. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing 2 days later, the trail now visible beneath the melting snow. Daniel had said nothing more about leaving. He didn't need to. His silence had changed, from guarded to respectful. He knew she wasn't the same woman he'd carried through his doorway. Neither of them were. She held Rebecca close, the child's body warm against her chest, and as she stared down the path that led east, toward the trading post, toward the same world that had discarded her like rot, something inside her revolted, not in fear, in clarity. She remembered what Mr. Blackwell had said. There's a settlement east. But Daniel had told her the truth. It was north, farther, and real. Blackwell had sent her in the wrong direction, knowing full well she'd likely die. He had smiled as he did it, called it business, called her astray. That was the moment Sarah realized what had really happened. The world didn't forget her. It rejected her, because it saw something it couldn't control, and that's when the understanding cracked her open. It was never about survival. It was about transformation. The snow hadn't buried her. It had initiated her. The birth wasn't just of a child, but of a myth. The kind that echoes louder than bullets, louder than marriage vows, louder than any paper kingdom. Back in the cabin, Daniel was preparing a pack for her, supplies, tools, dried meat, herbs for the baby. She returned from the tree line and met his eyes. "I'm not going back," she said. Daniel nodded. No surprise, just something like pride in his eyes, not for her choice, but for her becoming. "You won't be safe here forever," he said. "I wasn't safe anywhere," she answered. "Here, at least, I'm true." He placed a hand on Rebecca's head gently. "She'll grow strong here, but you'll need to teach her how to walk in both worlds." "I will," Sarah promised. "But she'll know which one made her, and which one tried to erase her." In that moment, the fire behind them crackled, not like wood, like a voice, as if something very old had been watching and was now satisfied. The days that followed weren't measured in time, but in transformation. Sarah didn't just recover, she reshaped. Her hands learned the weight of tools, the balance of knives, the rhythm of firewood splitting beneath cold steel. Daniel showed her how to set traps, how to read animal tracks, how to listen when the trees went silent, not because he thought she couldn't survive without him, but because he knew she could. And Rebecca, wrapped in furs and laid beside the fire, never cried without purpose. She watched everything, silent, aware, eyes like blue steel. Daniel said nothing, but Sarah noticed the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, as if he saw not a child, but a signal. "She reminds me of Lily," he said one night softly, "but not in sorrow, in strength." Sarah didn't respond. Some things don't need answers, only recognition, because by now she understood. This wasn't the wilderness. This was the forge, and every man, every system, every lie that had broken her had only heated the metal until all that remained was blade. But the world doesn't allow women like Sarah to stay hidden forever. The tracks came first, 2 days east of the cabin, deep, heavy, booted. Settler men, at least 3, not hunters, not trappers, men searching. Daniel found the trail, returned quiet. "They're looking," he said. "For me?" Sarah asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Thomas. Not because he regretted leaving, but because he feared what she might become if she lived. Empires don't care about dead women, but they fear awakened ones. Sarah stared into the fire, her jaw tightening. "He won't take her from me." Daniel nodded. "He won't take anything." That night, she packed a second satchel. She didn't know if she'd run or if she'd fight, but she would not be prey again. She had birthed her child into blood and snow. She had become what the Sir, Klee, had called her to be. She wasn't wandering anymore. She was waiting, and if Thomas came, he would find not the woman he left, but the legend he made. The morning Thomas arrived, the sky was too clear, the kind of blue that makes men believe they're righteous. He rode at the head of two others, trappers, hired guns maybe, men with calloused eyes and idle cruelty on their tongues. They weren't here to make amends. They were here to reclaim, to remind. He dismounted like he owned the dirt, walked to the cabin with false calm, each step dragging centuries of entitlement behind it. Daniel stood in the doorway, rifle not raised, just visible. Sarah was inside, silent, waiting. Thomas didn't call her name like a husband. He called it like a jailer. "Sarah, it's time to go home." But this was her home now, not because she'd claimed it, because it had claimed her. She stepped into the doorway, Rebecca against her chest, wrapped in the same deer hide Daniel had once used to bury his grief. Thomas froze. She didn't look ruined. She didn't look afraid. She looked unreachable. "I came to take you back," he said. "You've made your point." "No," Sarah replied. "I've made my choice." He smirked, nodding toward the child. "You think he'll raise another man's daughter? Out here in the wild? What kind of life is that?" Sarah looked down at Rebecca. The child blinked up at her, calm, unyielding. The kind of life where no one gets to sell her soul for shelter. Behind Thomas, one of the hired men shifted uneasily. The woods had grown too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace, but judgment. He looked at the trees like they were leaning in. Daniel spoke now. Once. Quiet. "You should leave." Thomas laughed. "You think I fear you?" But it wasn't Daniel he needed to fear. It was the place. The silence. The stone ring buried beneath the snow, and the woman who'd bled into it. Sarah stepped forward. "You left me to die, Thomas." "But I didn't die," I remembered. He tried to speak, but the words caught like smoke in his throat. Something in her eyes, something unmade, was staring back at him now, not rage, not sadness, power. He left, not with shouts, with silence, because he knew she hadn't been rescued. She had resurrected, and some ghosts don't haunt, they guard.